given that Hedera actually has more services, it could enable a greater degree of decentralization. So you wouldn't just be identifying a user or a smart contract, but you could even load a file, which changes the game.
Welcome to Hedera Hashgraph's Gossip About Gossip. If you are a developer, an entrepreneur, crypto enthusiast, or just trying to learn more about how distributed ledger technology and Hedera Hashgraph will impact your industry, then you'll love the episodes that we have coming up. Bookmark us, add us to your podcast app, and stay tuned.
Hey there, and welcome to Hedera Hashgraph, Gossip About Gossip. I'm Paul Madsen. Hedera is a platform, and dApps build on platforms, but dApps need toolings and other infrastructure. So I'm happy to welcome today Pablo Peillard from Hashname Systems, who are building out much of that infrastructure. Welcome, Pablo. How are you?
Hey, Paul. Glad to be here. It's a pleasure to be on the podcast.
Awesome. So don't take this wrong, but you're an enabler, right? You are enabling key things on Hedera with the things that Hashname Systems building out.
That's right, Paul. Yeah, we're enabling developers to do more, reducing the steps to get to, deploying, building applications. A little bit like when you worry about the extra code for a login page or the extra code for securing a private key. We understand that those things are kind of global in the space, and if we take care of those, we're able to now allow that creative mind to focus on the specific product that they're working on.
Cool. So I want to come back to global, because to me that implies cross DLT, and I think Hashname Systems is to some extent is taking inspiration from other platforms. But before we dig in there, what about yourself? What's your background?
I'm a student for University of Texas at Dallas. I began my career as a computer science major, turned a bit more entrepreneurial over the couple of years. I got picked up for a project called the Grid Plus that was very interesting in decentralizing electricity, ultimately allowing neighbors essentially to be able to trade electricity. So if one of your neighbors just had a big yard and a lot of solar panels, he could theoretically sell electricity to a neighbor next door who might be using a lot of computing power or electricity in general, and allow a kind of free flowing of value and assets around neighborhoods without having a centralized entity was very enticing from my perspective, just seeing how you didn't need a big company to buy the electricity from you and then sell it to your neighbor. You could just do it straight.
Yeah, we have dApps doing that very same model on Hedera, right?
Exactly. So that's my background through how I kind of jumped into the blockchain decentralization space, and I learned a lot about how to store your keys, what to do, what not to do, the key values of decentralization, how you decentralize your keys, you decentralize your servers. You got to make sure different aspects are very, at least honed down so that you're not putting your users at risk.
Just you describing what you see as sort of the critical pieces of decentralization suggests why you chose to go the route of building out tools and infrastructure for others rather than building a dApp yourself. Is that fair? Just where your interests lay?
Well, my interests are still in the dApp development, or dApp, depending on who you ask. We are building decentralized applications such as Hashname Service, which we think are ways to enable a greater agency for individual, both economic and technological, where end users are able to finally manage a smart contract and get the functionality or meta functionality you would need out of a contract, but wouldn't necessarily have the background to do it yourself, deploy a contract and create your own naming service or host name service for your applications.
Fair enough. We'll come back to Hashname Service. It's a dApp by any definition, or dApp, but it's also one that you imagine being useful to other dApps, right? So in a sense, it's tooling.
It's a tooling, and especially the applications, everything else that with it behind the scenes to get to HNS was in the minds of developers. How can we enable ourselves and then others? So build for yourself to make something that you would use, and you'll know that other people will be using it if you're truly using it over time.
Yeah, if it's useful to you and you're a developer, then other developers will presumably find it useful as well. So how'd you come across Hedera? You're in Dallas, so that suggests a certain serendipity discovery.
It suggests a little bit. I heard some from friends in last year, but actually I started hearing about Hedera back in 2017, DEF CON in Cancun. There was a lot of talk about this new platform called Hedera Hashgraph and promising faster speeds, and that's where I first heard about it. Didn't delve into it too much until last year when I heard more about the Hedera 18 conference, and I figured it would be a great time to stop by and see it because it's downtown. It's only 20 minutes away from us. One of the biggest reasons I ended up going to that hackathon and stayed through, was it 2 nights, was a professor. He encouraged us to go and would, if we would place in a hackathon, we were able to skip out on the final, which was a great encouragement for a lot of students, including me.
Well, there's incentives. Everybody has to have an incentive model. So it's a travesty that there was interest in Hashgraph in a conference in Cancun, and I wasn't there to present. Gotta remedy that. Hedera 18 was kind of the first exposure, and you dug in the hackathon.
Definitely, it was the first kind of deep exposure into how Hedera works in the Java SDK. I learned a lot more about what were the key things that developers needed and what was missing. And it was actually the night before where I was brainstorming and I had a few ideas running about what could work and what couldn't work in terms of what is something that would help the community, not just another front end that would potentially be a marketplace, something that had an effect, an incremental effect to allow more people to develop easily on Hedera. And that's where it was actually officially called Hashname Service, I believe. And then we rebranded it.
Did we make you?
I believe so. We got
or maybe we guided you.
Yeah. I think it was a lot of the trademark terms a third-party company couldn't be called a Hedera as well. So, but Hashname Service still has a very similar ring and works just as much.
Yeah. So tell us about Hashname Service. It came out of Hedera 18, and you saw it as filling a need.
Yeah. So a lot of people were having issues with transferring accounts, being able to properly identify themselves. I'm 0.0. What was it? 154. And that was really the first kind of use case that we saw, people identifying accounts. Part of the market research we did before the hackathon, just to see what is best and what isn't, was the fact that one of the most popular initial applications for Ethereum was ENS. Same thing with Neo and even EOS. The other decentralized platforms, everyone has a name service, and it clearly made sense to at least have something of the sort to encourage wallet adoption. But given that Hedera actually has more services, it could enable a greater degree of decentralization. So you wouldn't just be identifying a user or a smart contract, but you could even load a file, which changes the game.
So to my mind, you poke fun at 0.0.258177, whatever. But to me, that's more intuitive and more memorable than a public key, right? That's sort of the default mechanism for identifying an account on other platforms. So is the value of HNS the same?
The value of HNS comes in where newer users who are still not used to IP addresses would need to connect to things, but also it offers a degree of upgradability without having to set up anything else on the smart contract end, for example. So
just that level of abstraction between identifier and user identifier?
Yes. So you have the account identifier or a contract identifier. You can now update those. You can set update keys for that. But now you have another degree of abstraction that allows anyone to change it. So it's not just someone who needs maybe Java, it's just changing an identifier, and it contains a very memorable name at the end of the day, both of which serve a good purpose in terms of either when you're programming or when you're sending money to Bob, or wanting to even identify a topic on HCS.
So I, of course, claimed Paul.hh. Like everybody else on the team, there was a big land rush to get the single name domains. Take me through the UX. Like, take for an example our wallet or somebody else's wallet. How would the UX change if there was HNS under the covers?
HNS would add a layer on the wallet end to resolve the names. So, for example, if I am in Composer and I decide to pay Paul.hh, it would first query the contract using the lookup function to see what is it resolving to, verify that it's a proper ID, and then store that in a directory away from the user. So the user would just see Paul.hh and know that it's you and last time updated at X time, and be able to immediately pay. So at the end of the day, the transaction would still be formed using the regular account IDs, but it would first query the name to put in the to value.
Yeah, and maybe similarly on the receiving wallet, the wallet could dereference the payer or the sending account into whatever domain, if one existed for that account.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Cool.
There's reverse lookups as well implemented with HNS, so you can see what domains are owned by each individual. So you'll be able to know where it could have come from.
Pablo, you mentioned Composer, but we hadn't yet talked about Composer. What is Composer, and how does it fit into what Hashing Systems is building?
So Composer was built out of a need. It is a wallet. It's a solution to a problem of holding keys on the website. When we started working on Hashname Service, we made sure that, one, we didn't hold anyone's keys, even if there were hot wallets or hotkeys, as usually known, where you create a wallet for an individual and you hold it on your servers and they can use it, but they can deem it as unsafe because it's held in your computer. Those are essentially honeypots, which hackers could theoretically get into and take away. So Composer is part of a bigger movement towards decentralizing the user's keys and abstracting the key power from the website itself. So even if you were to, for example, interact with Hashname Service and wanted to hack the users, you wouldn't get access to anything other than trigger pop-up functions, which is a lot safer than maybe logging in with a key store on the website, which could be tracked by, say, accidentally tracked by Google Analytics or some other analytic system.
So in the Composer model, the user's private key stays on their computer or stays on their cold wallet and accessed from their computer, but is nevertheless able to sign the transactions that interact with Hedera.
Exactly. So the idea is to protect the user, and then we were able to begin creating a better solution portal for Hashname Service. Because at the end of the day, anyone could theoretically run a transaction straight to the Hashname Service contract without using the portal, which is manager.hns.domains. It would work just as well. The portal is just another way for retail users who may not know too much about coding to access the Hedera platform.
So I could use the Java SDK to interact with the HNS contract and buy a domain and query domains, etc.
Exactly.
Cool. So I was watching a video. You were at the Helix Accelerator, were you not?
Yes, I was. Great times.
Yeah, must have been fun. I think I saw a presentation, perhaps your presentation at the end, and you were talking about three things that you thought Hedera needed. One was identity, which presumably was the motivation for HNS. Another was standards. Do you want to talk about what you mean by standards in the context of Hedera?
Yeah. Glad to hear more about that, because standards were a huge thing being pushed with Ethereum, especially as most people hear ERC20 tokens.
Right.
Those are standardized smart contracts that ultimately allow for a token that may not have been created yet to already be supported in a platform such as, for example, a decentralized exchange like Ether Delta, where if you create the contract up to that specification, you're able to interact with it, which is really the base layer of interoperability, where things can interact without having to sign a partnership program or a project or agreement. You deploy your token and someone could use it. It really forms and shapes the technological plumbing that we need to get to Ethereum levels of expansion. That's where we pushed a hash improvement proposal, or HIP, HIPs.
So Pablo, what's a HIP?
So a HIP stands for Hash Improvement Proposal. It's just a way for us as a community to put together documentation, ideas, processes where we think that we can either improve the current Hedera protocol, the communications therein between the dApps, the wallets, and Hedera itself, and or standards for smart contracts. So if there's a specific way that we want to write a contract, maybe using more read-only or pure or view tags or some other storage solution so that it makes use of a better, more efficient way of storing data within Hedera, we can write that up and talk with people. And it serves as a knowledge base for everyone to work from.
So there would be a component of the HIP framework, something comparable to ERC?
Yeah, so ERC is part of Ethereum improvement proposals, and there's different types of EIPs. There's ERCs, and then there's a core, networking, and interface. And ERC stands for Ethereum Request for Comment, which we followed, or we're planning to follow a similar stance with HIPs, where we have a Hashgraph request for comment as a way for users to look for feedback for their applications. So if they think that they can, or they have an interesting idea for a smart contract that would allow more people to do something that hasn't been done before, a new feature, for example, we can have that as a HRC and be able to get the feedback from the community and then build something.
So an HRC perhaps might be a refinement of an ERC, maybe taking advantage of a Hedera feature or Hashgraph feature that Ethereum doesn't provide?
Exactly. So little things like IPFS conversion to file IDs, account IDs needing to be a hex version of an account ID. There's small variations that opens a door for many developers to come in and set the standards right now for Hedera. And it's important to keep these contained in an area where everyone else can also benefit so that we can start building the main aspects of a community, which in most cases is starting with a knowledge base.
Where do HIPs happen? Where are they born? Where can people find out more?
Oh, HIPs can happen, well, they can start on your notebook or on a Google Drive document, but the most important step is to get them on GitHub. And if you go to github.com/hashgraph, you can see, if you scroll down, a HIP, and that's where HIPs is located.
Pablo, what's next for hashing systems? What's on the roadmap?
So in the future, we plan on building or releasing a few applications, some of which made Hashname Service happen as quick as it did. We have a verification application that integrates a few compilers and other solutions straight onto the web browser, so in Google Chrome, and allows anyone to code straight out of the web browser, as well as deploy and manage contracts without having to build a IntelliJ project. So we see that as a next step for developers to build some applications. With that in mind, we're adding a lot more features in the next coming weeks for Composer so that users are able to make full advantage of the Hashname Service application. where you could query a domain and pull a file, which could be an HTML file rendered straight on the browser. Someone could theoretically create their own Dropbox at this point if they wanted to, and build it connected to Composer to interact with the user's keys.
Are we storing that HTML on Hedera or on IPFS?
Definitely on Hedera. We want to make use of the Hedera services.
True. Yeah, I don't think that's a use case we anticipated, that we were going to be a web server.
Yeah, the way we've been talking with people about Hedera, it seems like a consortium of companies putting together their computing power. So, for example, if T-Mobile wanted to open up a branch in Africa, which I don't think they have one yet, could theoretically use the resources from an African node by taking the tokens from the American servers. So it really opens up the door for companies to be able to use data and computing power from different geographical places.
That's very interesting. Hadn't thought about it that way. Pablo, thank you very much for talking to me today. I'd love to see what Hashname Systems has already built, and I look forward to seeing what you build next.
Thanks for having us. And if you want to hear more about what we do, you can check out our Medium at medium.com/hashing systems.
Yeah, there's some great content on Medium, some really good technical content. I've enjoyed that.
Thank you. We try to document as much as we can as we are going through the process of building these new applications.
Awesome. Again, Pablo, thanks very much.
Thanks, Bob.
Let's stay in touch.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to Hedera Hashgraph's Gossip About Gossip. If you liked the episode, please subscribe, rate and review, and also share and tell your friends.
Or connect with us on social media like Twitter, Instagram, etc. at Hashgraph, particularly if you want to leave us feedback on the podcast. We look forward to hearing from you.